What if the most urgent warning about our collective future wasn't created yesterday? What if it was written thousands of years ago? Not on stone monuments or shouted from royal balconies, but carefully inked onto fragile parchment by men who believed they were recording a message for a distant generation. A generation living at the very edge of history. And what if that generation is ours? This isn't just mythology or symbolic legend. This is history, grounded in physical evidence. Because in 1947, a young shepherd, looking for a lost goat, stumbled into caves near the Dead Sea. There, he unknowingly uncovered clay jars containing ancient manuscripts. These texts, later identified as the Dead Sea Scrolls, dated back more than 2,000 years and included remarkably preserved copies of prophetic writings like those from Isaiah, alongside fragments connected to apocalyptic imagery, later echoed in the Book of Revelation. These weren't abstract spiritual meditations meant to inspire vague reflection. They were direct warnings. They described corrupt kingdoms intoxicated by power, societies that would redefine morality until right and wrong were completely reversed. They spoke of leaders who would publicly talk of peace while quietly preparing for conflict, economic systems capable of controlling who could buy and sell, and populations distracted by pleasure while justice slowly decayed just beneath the surface of apparent prosperity. For centuries, skeptics argued that biblical prophecy had been rewritten and reshaped over time, that the message had evolved to fit later generations. Yet, when scholars compared the ancient Isaiah scroll found among the Dead Sea Scrolls with modern versions of the same text, they found something astonishing, something deeply unsettling. Across millennia of conflict, exile, and cultural upheaval, the core message had remained virtually unchanged. Preserved with extraordinary precision, the warning hadn't shifted, softened, or adapted to modern comfort. This forces a far more uncomfortable question upon us. If the message has stayed consistent across thousands of years, is it possible that what has truly changed is not the text, but the condition of the humanity reading it? The visions recorded in the Book of Revelation describe a global system intertwined with commerce, authority, and allegiance. It portrays a mark associated with economic participation, suggesting a structure capable of regulating who can buy or sell. For generations, this imagery seemed purely symbolic or metaphorical, because the technology to implement such control simply did not exist. Today, however, digital currencies are steadily replacing physical cash. Biometric identification systems are expanding across nations. Artificial intelligence monitors behavior on a scale unimaginable even half a century ago. Entire populations can now be tracked, categorized, restricted, or financially excluded through centralized digital infrastructures. This raises an unavoidable question. Was ancient prophetic language the only vocabulary available to describe systems that would unexist for another 2,000 years? History repeatedly demonstrates that civilizations rarely collapse because of a sudden external attack alone. Instead, they deteriorate internally. Moral compromise, economic excess, political corruption, and public distraction. These are the patterns seen in the fall of ancient Israel, in the decline of the Roman Empire, and in every dominant power that once believed itself immune to decay and destined for permanence. The prophet Isaiah described times when cities would stand empty and arrogance would be humbled. He wrote of nations trembling not only from military threat but from a pervasive fear that destabilizes societies from within. This suggests that psychological unraveling can precede physical destruction, and that internal fracture often weakens empires long before any visible collapse occurs. In recent years, the world experienced a global crisis capable of halting economies, restricting movement, and altering daily life across continents almost overnight. It created a synchronized pause. Borders closed, streets emptied, institutions shut their doors, and billions of people confronted uncertainty at the exact same time. This prompted many to wonder whether such a coordinated disruption was an isolated event, or the beginning of a larger historical shift. Among the writings discovered with the Dead Sea Scrolls were texts from a Jewish sect often identified as the East. This community believed it was living in the final generation before a great reckoning. They described a coming struggle between forces of light and darkness, expressed not just in spiritual language but through political and social structures. They saw deception, conflict, and moral division as signs of an approaching climax in human history. In our own time, information itself has become contested terrain. Deepfake technology can fabricate convincing realities, Algorithms invisibly shape our perceptions, and narratives shift so rapidly that societies struggle to agree on even basic facts. This illustrates how truth can fragment in ways that destabilize collective trust and create fertile ground for manipulation on an unprecedented scale. The prophetic texts warned of deception, powerful enough to mislead many. They described signs and wonders that would astonish populations. In an ancient context, this language captured the idea of persuasive spectacles beyond ordinary explanation. It raises the possibility that emerging technologies capable of simulating voices, images, and entire identities might represent modern parallels to symbolic descriptions written in an era that had no digital vocabulary. Ancient empires were limited by geography, slow communication, and fragmented authority. Global dominance was structurally impossible, but today, international summits gather leaders from nearly every nation in a single room. Financial markets respond within seconds to decisions made thousands of miles away. Supply chains span continents, and conflicts in one region immediately affect economies worldwide. This demonstrates that humanity now operates within an interconnected framework once unimaginable. The prophetic vision of a final system with worldwide influence was historically dismissed as unrealistic. Yet in the present era, the digital, financial, and political infrastructure capable of exerting global coordination undeniably exists. It's not a fantasy, but an observable reality embedded in international institutions and technological networks. Yet the scrolls consistently emphasize that external systems reflect internal conditions. They link societal collapse not merely to governance, but to normalized greed, celebrated violence, mocked sacred values, and neglected vulnerability. This suggests that the true catalyst of decline is the moral posture of ordinary individuals who tolerate erosion until the consequences become unavoidable. The warning embedded in that ancient parchment was never primarily about predicting dates or offering countdowns. It was about describing conditions, about diagnosing the spiritual and ethical health of a civilization. It was about illustrating patterns that repeat until they reach a culmination, making prophecy as much a mirror for self-examination as a forecast of future events. If we evaluate our own era marked by polarization, digital dependency, declining institutional trust, escalating geopolitical tension, and rapid technological acceleration, we are compelled to ask, are we witnessing just another historical cycle of rise and fall? Or are we approaching a convergence that earlier generations could only describe symbolically? The community that preserved the scrolls through war, conquest, and exile did so because they believed future generations would need the message. They safeguarded these texts across centuries so that a time of recognizable moral and political turbulence might rediscover their warnings and reconsider the trajectory of human history. Today, those manuscripts are displayed behind glass, examined by historians and scholars, yet their central message remains stark and direct. Power corrupts, truth erodes, and consequences follow, not always through dramatic supernatural intervention, but often through the natural unfolding of economic implosion, cultural fragmentation, and conflict fueled by pride and unchecked ambition. The Book of Revelation concludes not merely with chaos, but with unveiling. The word revelation itself signifies disclosure and exposure. It suggests that hidden realities eventually surface, and that systems built on deception cannot remain concealed indefinitely. This raises the possibility that our technological advancement may simultaneously empower and expose the vulnerabilities of our global civilization. The warning buried in ancient scrolls was never intended to paralyze humanity with fear, but to awaken awareness. It urges leaders toward humility, citizens toward responsibility, and societies toward accountability, because history consistently shows that ignored warnings intensify consequences rather than eliminate them. The manuscripts exist. The texts are verifiable. The words have endured across centuries of scrutiny. This leaves us not with the question of whether the warning was written, but whether we recognize our own reflection within it, and whether we are willing to confront the patterns that appear increasingly familiar. No sirens pierce the sky, and no visible signs interrupt our daily routine. Yet subtle signals emerge through economic shifts, technological overreach, moral confusion, and global realignment. These patterns are unfolding quietly yet persistently, in ways that mirror descriptions once dismissed as distant or symbolic. The shepherd who uncovered the scrolls could not have imagined that the fragile parchment he discovered would echo into the 21st century. confronting a technologically advanced world with ancient words that remain disturbingly relevant and challenging. This narrative is not a call to panic, but a call to awareness. Every civilization believes itself too advanced to fall, and every generation assumes the warnings were intended for someone else, until circumstances reveal otherwise, and history repeats with unforgiving precision. The ancient ink has endured, the message has not changed. The pattern has not disappeared. The only variable that remains in this unfolding equation is whether we, living in this interconnected and powerful age, will recognize the signal before the consequences of ignoring it become undeniable. This has been your signal. The transmission remains open for those willing to examine the warning hidden in plain sight. Thanks for watching.